The fire crackled low, its glow carving gold into the lines of his weathered face. Levi had been sitting there alone for hours, hat tipped low, rifle across his knees, the endless prairie stretching out black and silent around him. Then came a sound he hadn't expected, a woman's voice, quiet but steady. "I'll sleep outside," she said. He looked up. Tessa stood there in the shadows, cloak pulled tight against the night air, eyes sharp but tired in the firelight. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, her boots were scuffed nearly through, and the way she held herself told him she wasn't used to asking for much, if anything at all. For a long moment Levi just studied her, the crackle of the fire, the only sound between them. Finally he spoke, voice low, rough from a day spent with no words. "You'll share my fire tonight." The words landed heavier than he meant, as if some line had been crossed just by speaking them. She blinked, caught between protest and relief, and for the first time in weeks Levi felt the stillness of the night shift. But let's go back to where it all started. The wind was restless that autumn, carrying dust off the dry plains and pushing it down into every crack of Levi's homestead. He'd lived alone on that patch of earth for near on 6 years now, a square mile of grass, scrub, and stubborn will. His neighbors, those that still remained, called him a man made of iron and silence. Truth was Levi was just too tired to leave and too proud to fail. He'd lost most of what mattered years before, family, trust, and any sense of belonging that wasn't tied to the stubborn weight of his land. Days were long and evenings longer, the kind that stretched out until a man wondered if his own voice still worked. He filled the quiet with chores, with carving fence posts, with breaking the ground for winter wheat that never seemed to take root. The town 10 miles south knew him only as Levi, never Mr. Turner, never anything more. He bought supplies when needed, answered questions with nods, and left before anyone thought to press further. A man like him carried a reputation he didn't ask for, hard, unyielding, dangerous if pressed. But beneath the hat and calloused hands, Levi carried something far heavier, a loneliness that clung like dust after a storm. That night, though, the dust carried something else. He first noticed her tracks near sundown. A single line of boot prints cutting across the brittle grass, too small to be a man's, too steady to belong to someone wandering lost. He followed them from the far fence line, expecting some drifter or maybe a neighbor's daughter gone astray. What he found was a woman standing by the edge of his corral, one hand resting on the post, her gaze fixed on the weary horse inside. She turned when she heard his boots in the dirt. Her name, she said, was Tessa. No last name offered. Just that. She was traveling north, though her eyes didn't look like they had much left to hope for in any direction. Her skirt was torn near the hem, her shawl threadbare, and her boots, though tough, looked near ready to split at the soles. Levi didn't ask why she was there. In the West, a man didn't question survival when he saw it. "You're far from the trail," he said simply. Her eyes flicked to his rifle, then back to his face. "So are you." He respected the answer. Didn't press. Just told her she could rest a spell, water her horse, though she had none, and take what time she needed. He went back to splitting kindling, expecting she'd vanish with the dusk. But she stayed. As the sun bled down behind the ridges, she lingered near the corral, watching him with a wariness that felt less like fear and more like someone calculating where safety began and ended. By the time Levi lit his fire, she was still there, the prairie night falling cold and sharp around them. That's when she said it. "I'll sleep outside." There was something in the way she said it, not pride, not defiance, but a quiet acceptance. Like the earth itself had given her no choice, and she'd long since stopped asking for comfort. Levi studied her a long while, the flames throwing light on her face. A man could read a lot in silence if he looked hard enough. He saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the thinness of her hands, the way she shifted like she hadn't known a real bed in months. "You'll share my fire tonight," he said finally. The words surprised even him. They carried weight, like he was offering more than just warmth. She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly, as though measuring what kind of man he was. But in the end, she stepped closer, settling down on the far side of the flames. She didn't thank him, didn't speak at all. Just pulled her shawl tighter and let the silence of the plains wrap around them both. Levi leaned back, brim of his hat shading his eyes from the fire's glare, and wondered what sort of storm he'd just let into his quiet life. Because in the Old West, a stranger never just came with the night. They came with a story, and stories out here had a way of bleeding into yours, whether you asked for them or not. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Levi's horse shifted in the corral, restless, as if sensing something unseen. The fire popped, a spark flaring bright before dying in the dust. And Levi, for the first time in years, felt the heavy quiet of his homestead change. The night was no longer just his. The firelight flickered across her face, and in the lines of her expression he saw something familiar, though he couldn't yet place it. Loss, maybe. Or secret not ready to be told. Either way, he knew this. The course of his days had just shifted, and there'd be no going back. The prairie didn't give gifts for free. And if a woman like Tessa found her way to his fire, it meant the storm that followed wasn't far behind. Levi woke before dawn, as he always did. The plains were a pale gray sea under a sky, just beginning to catch fire with the first streaks of morning. His breath curled white in the cold, and the coals of the campfire still glowed faintly, a dull heart beating in the ashes. Across from him, she was still there. Tessa, wrapped tight in her threadbare shawl, chin tucked low, one hand curled near the embers as though she'd been reaching for the little warmth they had left. She didn't stir when he rose, didn't open her eyes when he moved about the fire, and for a moment Levi wondered if she was only pretending to sleep, keeping her guard up the way a lone traveler must. He poured water into the blackened kettle, let it hang over the new flame, and listened. The wind tugged at the grass. A hawk wheeled in the distance. Everything was the same as it had been yesterday, except for her. By the time the smell of coffee filled the morning air, her eyes opened. They were sharp, even after sleep, and she sat up slow, careful, as though every movement carried weight. "You've got no reason to be kind," she said quietly. Levi paused, coffee pot in hand. "And no reason not to." She looked at him, then really looked, as though trying to find a crack in that answer. But she didn't argue. She just took the tin cup he poured for her, wrapped her hand around it, and let the steam rise against her face. For a long while they sat in silence. It wasn't an unfriendly silence, but the kind born of two people used to living inside their own walls. Levi didn't push, and she didn't offer. When the sun lifted higher, she finally spoke again. "I can work for my keep," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't take handouts." Levi gave a dry, quiet chuckle, one that startled even him. "There's no keep here. Just dust, horses, and a man too stubborn to quit." She studied him, her face unreadable, then nodded as if she understood something deeper in those words. She set down her cup and began gathering what kindling she could find near the edge of the yard, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had known labor all her life. Levi didn't stop her. He watched, then went about tending the stock, the two of them working side by side, without much talk. By noon, the heat came heavy, dragging the smell of dry earth with it. Levi hitched up the wagon for a trip to town. Supplies had been running low, and now he had another mouth to feed. He half expected her to vanish while he was gone, leaving nothing behind but the print of her boots in the dirt. But when he mentioned town, Tessa stiffened. "I'll stay," she said quickly, almost too quickly. Levi raised a brow. "Ain't much to steal, if that's what you're thinking." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't explain. She just repeated softer, "I'll stay." He let it be. A man learned out here not to press where the truth wasn't ready. The town was already buzzing when he rode in. Dust swirled between wagon wheels, children ran barefoot near the livery, and the clatter of the blacksmith's hammer carried sharp over the noise. Levi kept to himself, as always. He picked up flour, beans, and lamp oil, nodded to the storekeep, and loaded the wagon. But whispers followed him the way they always did. Folks in town liked to talk, especially about a man who lived alone, far out where the prairie swallowed most things whole. "Reckon he's hiding something," he heard one man murmur near the saloon. "Or running from something," another replied. Levi ignored them, but he felt the weight of their stares all the same. Out here, reputation traveled faster than truth, and once it set in, it stuck like burrs. He was near ready to leave when Sheriff Rollins stepped out from the boardwalk. A broad man with a permanent squint, Rollins didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Haven't seen you in town for a spell, Levi," he said, voice casual but edged. "Didn't have reason to," Levi replied. The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the wagon. "You expecting company?" Levi's grip tightened on the reins. He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. Rollins narrowed his eyes. "You best be careful who you take in, Turner. Times like these, folks got long memories and quick tempers." Levi held the man's gaze, steady and unyielding, until the sheriff finally stepped aside. But the warning stayed lodged in his chest the whole ride home. When he returned, Tessa was where he left her, sitting on the step of his cabin, mending a tear in her shawl with a bit of thread she must have carried with her. She looked up when she heard the wagon, but she didn't smile, didn't soften. She only nodded, as if to confirm he'd come back at all. He unloaded the supplies, keeping his words few. She helped carry what she could, silent as ever. But when the sun dipped again, and they sat near the fire, she finally broke it. They don't take kindly to strays in town, do they? Levi's head lifted, eyes narrowing slightly. You've been to that town. Her gaze flickered to the flames. Once. No more than that. But the weight in her tone was enough. Levi leaned back, studying her in the firelight. He thought about the whispers, the sheriff's warning, and the way she flinched at the mention of town. He thought about how easy it would be to tell her to move on, to keep his life as quiet and solitary as it had been. But then he saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she pulled her shawl tighter, the way her eyes carried not just defiance, but exhaustion, as if she had been fighting for longer than anyone should. Levi didn't speak his decision aloud. He just reached for another log, set it on the fire, and let the flames rise higher between them. And in that silence, the choice was made. Tomorrow the town would know. The neighbors would whisper louder. Sheriff Rollins might even come knocking. But tonight, under the endless sky, Levi had already crossed the line. The woman had a place by his fire. And the West never forgave kindness easily. The night broke quiet, but Levi knew peace like that never lasted long on the frontier. Morning came with a low wind that carried a sharp bite, the kind that told him autumn was dying fast. He rose early to check the herd and mend a stretch of broken fence near the ridge. Tessa was already outside, sleeves rolled back, hauling water as though she'd been born to the work. He didn't tell her to stop. He just watched for a moment, noting the determination in every movement. She didn't complain, didn't ask questions. She worked like someone who feared stillness more than exhaustion. By noon the sky darkened. Not with storm clouds, but with a faint haze of dust trails far off, moving across the prairie. Levi paused in his work, leaning on the post, eyes narrowing at the horizon. Riders. Maybe 2, maybe 10. Too far to count, but close enough to stir a quiet unease in his gut. That night, the unease grew. They sat by the fire again, but Levi's gaze kept drifting to the dark edge of the plains. His horse shifted restless in the corral. Even the coyotes seemed to keep their distance. You feel it too, Tessa said softly. Levi didn't look at her. What's that? The air. It's waiting. He finally turned, firelight catching in his eyes. She wasn't wrong. Something was coming, and he was beginning to think it had more to do with her than him. The first knock came the next afternoon. Not a polite knock, but the heavy thud of fists against wood. Levi opened the door to find 3 men standing on his porch, neighbors from half a day's ride off. He knew their faces well enough, men he'd traded with, men who kept to themselves the way he did. But their expressions weren't friendly. "Evenin', Levi," one of them said, voice flat. "Evenin'," Levi returned. The man's eyes flicked past him into the cabin. "Word in town is you've got company." Levi didn't answer right away. His silence stretched, heavy as iron. Finally, he said, "A traveler. Needed rest." "That traveler got a name," another man pressed. Before Levi could answer, Tessa stepped into view. She hadn't meant to, but the sound of voices had drawn her near. When the men saw her, something shifted in their faces, recognition, suspicion, something darker. "You," the first man muttered. Tessa froze. Levi's jaw tightened. "She's under my roof." The man spat in the dirt. "Then you're a fool, Turner. You don't know what you're sheltering." "Don't much care for threats on my porch," Levi said evenly, though his hand had found the edge of the door. The men exchanged looks, then stepped back. "Just remember what we said. Folks around here got long memories." When they rode off, Levi shut the door slow, eyes never leaving Tessa. She wouldn't meet his gaze. "Want to tell me what that was about?" he asked finally. Her hands twisted in her shawl, knuckles white. "No," Levi held her silence a long time, then nodded once. "Then don't." But he knew now the storm was closer than ever. By the third night, whispers turned to proof. The sound of hoofbeats carried across the plains, steady and measured, not the wild gallop of outlaws, but the deliberate approach of men who wanted to be seen. Levi stood at the edge of his yard, rifle across his arm, as the riders drew close enough for the firelight to catch them. Sheriff Rollins was at their head. Behind him, a handful of men from town, some neighbors, some drifters who'd taken route too long. "Evening, Levi," the sheriff called out, voice steady. Levi didn't move. "You ride with more men than you need for a visit." Rollins's gaze slid toward the cabin. "Word is you're hiding a woman. One that don't belong here." Levi's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's under my fire. That's all that matters." The sheriff shifted in the saddle. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. There are folks who want answers. If you won't give M, they'll take M." Behind him, one of the townsmen shouted, "We ain't forgetting what she did." Tessa's voice carried from the cabin door, trembling but strong. "I did what I had to do." Levi turned, the firelight catching her face. For the first time since she'd arrived, he saw not just exhaustion but defiance, raw and unbroken. The sheriff sighed. "Levi, step aside." Levi raised the rifle, not aiming yet, just lifting it slow. "Ain't gonna happen." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the crackle of the fire. Then one of the riders muttered, low but sharp, "Blood's gonna spill before this is done." Levi's chest felt heavy, but his voice was steady as stone. "Not tonight." For a long, drawn-out moment, it seemed like the night itself held its breath. The sheriff studied him, the firelight painting his face in shadows. Finally, with a flick of his reins, Rollins turned his horse. "Have it your way, Turner. But this ain't finished." The riders pulled back, disappearing into the dark. But Levi knew better than to believe it was over. He lowered the rifle, breath steady but hard. Behind him, Tessa stood in the doorway, her shawl pulled tight, eyes shining in the firelight. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, "You don't know what you've done." Levi looked at her, the flames painting both their faces in stark relief. "I reckon I do," he said. But as the hoofbeats faded into the distance, Levi knew the truth. Whatever Tessa carried with her, whatever she'd done to earn the weight of those men's anger, he had just tied his life to it. And the prairie, cold, merciless, was about to test how far one man's kindness could go. The wind shifted at dawn, carrying with it the smell of smoke from a fire too far off to see. Levi stood at the fence line, hat low over his brow, watching the horizon. His horse was uneasy, pacing the corral with ears pinned back. The world was too quiet. That kind of quiet meant something was out there, watching, waiting. Inside the cabin, Tessa stirred the coals of the fire. She hadn't slept much. Every time the coyotes howled, she flinched. Every time the wood popped, her hand went instinctively to the small knife she kept hidden in her shawl. Levi noticed, though he never spoke of it. When he finally came inside, she looked up at him. "They'll be back," she said simply. Levi poured black coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "I know." The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the kettle. She didn't press him, and he didn't ask the questions that burned at the edge of his mind. He didn't need the answers right now. The truth had a way of showing itself when the time came. By midday, the signs were plain. From the ridge, Levi spotted dust plumes to the south, more riders, steady as a line of ants, moving toward his land. But it wasn't just the townsfolk this time. He caught flashes of paint, feathers, and lances catching the light. His chest tightened. That wasn't just a posse. That was a war party. He came down off the ridge fast, boots crunching hard on dry earth, jaw set. Tessa was waiting near the corral, eyes wide, as though she already knew. "How many?" she asked. "Enough," he said. "Too many." Her hands clenched around the shawl. "It's me they want." Levi stopped short, studying her. "You sure of that?" She nodded once, sharp. "I've seen that paint before. They don't ride this far without reason." For the first time, he heard her voice break. Not from fear, but from something heavier. Guilt. "They'll burn you out just to get to me," she whispered. Levi adjusted his hat, eyes cold. "They'll have to go through me first." That night, the air grew thick with tension. The moon climbed, heavy and pale, and somewhere in the distance came the steady rhythm of drums. Slow at first, then rising, echoing across the plains. Levi stood at the cabin door, rifle in hand, listening. The sound carried down into his bones. He'd heard it before years ago, when the Comanche had raided a ranch 2 valleys over. By morning, nothing had been left standing. Tessa came to stand beside him. Her face was pale in the moonlight, eyes dark pools of memory. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I wasn't just passing through. She stopped, swallowing hard. Levi's gaze shifted to her. What did you do, Tessa? Her voice cracked. I ran. He waited. They gave me a choice, she said finally, words tumbling out like stones. A man I was promised to or the road. I chose the road. Levi didn't move. The truth, simple and sharp, settled heavy between them. You think they'll ride all this way for that? He asked. Her shoulders shook. You don't understand. I wasn't just any promise. I was his promise. And he doesn't forgive. The war drums grew louder, echoing through the night. Levi exhaled slow, steady, his grip tightening on the rifle. Then he'll find I don't scare easy. By midnight, the riders arrived. The glow of torches lit the horizon, moving in a slow circle around his homestead. Levi counted at least 30 silhouettes, mounted and silent except for the steady beat of the drums. They didn't charge. They didn't shout. They just waited, shadows in the night. From the south came the familiar figures of townsfolk too, men with rifles, men with fear in their eyes. Sheriff Rollins was among them, his face grave as he rode up to Levi's fence line. You've stirred up a storm, Turner, Rollins said. One that don't end well for any of us. Levi stood firm. They want her. That's plain enough. Rollins's gaze flicked to the cabin. Give her over, and maybe they'll leave. Behind him, one of the townsmen shouted, Ain't worth all our lives, Turner. Levi's voice was steady as stone. She stays under my fire. Rollins swore under his breath. You'll get us all killed. But Levi didn't waver. He turned, meeting Tessa's gaze where she stood just inside the doorway. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to fall silent. No drums, no hoofbeats, just the quiet bond of two souls caught in the teeth of fate. Then the war drums roared again, louder than before. The circle of riders closed tighter, torches flaring bright against the dark. The townsmen raised their rifles, voices sharp with fear. And Levi, rifle steady in his hands, knew what was coming. The night had become a standoff, one man, one woman, and two forces of the frontier pressing in from every side. It would take more than bullets to see morning. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but neither of them dared sleep. The drums still rolled across the plains, steady as a heartbeat, keeping the night alive with threat. Levi sat at the table, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the door. Tessa sat near the window, her shawl wrapped tight, watching torchlight flicker against the far hills. When dawn finally bled pale across the horizon, the riders were still there, silent, waiting. The torches had burned down to ash, but their horses stamped restless, their shadows long across the grass. Levi stepped outside into the chill morning air, his breath rising white. Sheriff Rollins was already there, saddle-worn and weary, his men slouched in their saddles, fear carving deep lines into their faces. They ain't gone, Rollins said grimly. They won't, Levi answered. The sheriff spat into the dirt. This is their way. They'll wait till we starve or slip, then they'll take what they came for. His eyes hardened. You know what they want, Levi? Don't make us all bleed for one runaway. Levi's jaw tightened. He didn't look back at the cabin, though he felt Tessa's gaze on him from the doorway. Not handing her over. Rollins cursed low. Then find a way to end this, because they won't leave till it's finished. That evening, the drums stopped. Silence fell heavy, more dangerous than sound. From the circle of riders, one figure dismounted, moving forward slow, deliberate. He was taller than most, wrapped in furs, his face painted in red and black. His hair hung long, bound with feathers, and he carried no weapon in his hands. Tessa's breath caught sharp. It's him, she whispered. Levi stepped forward, rifle low, but ready. The man stopped at the fence, his dark eyes fixed on Levi. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady. You keep what is mine. Levi's eyes flicked to Tessa, then back to the man. She's free. The man's jaw flexed. No, she is promised. My fire, my home, my bloodline. His gaze hardened, cutting like flint. You took her. You keep her. Then you keep our war. The words hung heavy. Behind him, the riders shifted, feathers rustling, horses stamping. The townsman behind Levi muttered sharp, angry whispers. Levi spoke calm, slow. She came to me. I didn't take her. The man's eyes flicked past him, landing on Tessa in the doorway. You shame me, he said in his own tongue. Tessa flinched at the words, but understood them. Levi saw her lips tremble. Then she stepped forward, shawl slipping from her shoulders, voice breaking, but strong enough to carry. I never wanted your fire, she said. I never wanted chains disguised as vows. I wanted to breathe. The painted man's nostrils flared. His voice rose sharp, the first hint of anger. You were mine. Levi lifted his rifle slightly, not aimed, just reminding him. Not anymore. The silence after was knife-edge sharp. Every man, every rider, every horse held still, waiting for a single spark to set the night ablaze. Then, unexpectedly, the painted man laughed. It was not kind. It was hollow, bitter. He looked Levi full in the eye. Then you carry her burden. Her shame is yours now. He turned, mounting his horse, in one swift motion. The riders followed, a ripple through the circle, pulling back slow into the hills. Within minutes, the drums began again, distant but sure. Rollins cursed low. They ain't finished. They'll be back stronger. And next time they won't talk. Levi didn't answer. He looked at Tessa instead. She stood pale in the firelight, her eyes wet, her lips pressed tight. She whispered, barely audible, I never should have come. Levi shook his head, steady. You were meant to. But inside, as the drums faded back into the hills, Levi knew Rollins was right. This wasn't peace. This was only the breath before the storm.